The prison bully kicked Seagal to the ground in front of 200 inmates. The concrete was cold, unforgiving. Steven's shoulder hit hard, pain shooting through his ribs. Around him, the yard erupted in shouts, laughter, chaos. Inmates pressed against fences. Others climbed tables to get a better view. This was entertainment. This was blood sport. Victor, the sledge, Kovac stood over him, massive and unmovable, his shadow swallowing Steven whole. His boots were scuffed, worn from years of violence. His knuckles were scarred, each mark a story of someone broken. He leaned down, voice dripping with contempt. "Welcome to my kingdom, movie star. Here, your fancy moves mean nothing." Steven tasted copper. His lip was split. His pride was bruised. But his eyes stayed calm, calculating, watching everything. Kovac kicked dirt onto Steven's chest, then turned to the crowd, arms raised like a gladiator claiming victory. The inmates roared their approval. Guards stood motionless on the towers, hands on their rifles, watching but not intervening. This wasn't their fight. This was Kovac's world. But what the bully didn't know was that Steven wasn't there as a prisoner. He was there undercover, working with the FBI, and what happened in the next 72 hours changed that prison forever. Kovac walked away, his crew following like wolves trailing an alpha. Steven stayed on the ground, breathing slow, letting the moment pass. He didn't fight back, not yet. Because fighting back would blow everything. He was playing a role. The most dangerous role of his life. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? I want to see how far the story travels. It started 3 weeks earlier in a federal building in Los Angeles. The room was cold, sterile, windowless. The kind of room where secrets were made and lives were changed. A single table sat in the center, 2 chairs on opposite sides. The walls were soundproof, no recording devices, nothing that could leak. Agent Marissa Chen sat across from Steven, her expression unreadable. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. The kind of federal agent who had seen too much to be impressed by celebrity or fame. She slid a file across the table, the manila folder thick with documents, photos, evidence. Steven opened it slowly. Redwood State Penitentiary. Chen said, her voice flat and professional. Maximum security. One of the most dangerous prisons in the country. We've lost 2 undercover agents in 6 months. Steven looked up from the file. Lost. Dead. Both ruled as inmate accidents. Stabbed in the showers. Beaten in the yard. Guards claimed they didn't see anything. Cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. She paused, letting that sink in. But we know better. She leaned forward, tapping a photo in the file. The man in the picture was a monster, massive build, shoulders like boulders, neck thick as a tree trunk. His face was a roadmap of violence, scars across his cheek, a crooked nose broken multiple times, eyes that held no mercy. Tattoos crawled up his neck, Russian script mixed with prison ink, symbols of power and brutality. His name Victor, the sledge, Kovac, former enforcer for the Volkov crime family. Chen continued. Russian mob. He's serving life without parole for murder, racketeering, and about 15 other charges we managed to make stick. But inside those walls he runs everything: drugs, weapons, contraband, even some of the guards. Steven studied the photo. Kovac wasn't just dangerous, he was smart, organized, a king in a concrete kingdom. We believe he's coordinating hits on the outside, Chen said. Witnesses who are about to testify. Prosecutors building cases against his old crew. Maybe even a federal judge who's been receiving threats. Steven closed the file, his jaw tight. So why me? Chen didn't hesitate. Because you're famous. Because no one will suspect you're working with us. You'll go in as a celebrity doing a so-called documentary on prison reform. We'll stage an arrest, make it look real. Assault charges. Public scandal. The media will eat it up. Steven leaned back, arms crossed, thinking it through. And when Kovac tries to break me, Marissa didn't blink. You let him think he has. 2 days later, Steven was photographed in handcuffs outside a Los Angeles courthouse. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved in his face. His lawyer played the part perfectly, shouting about injustice, about his client's innocence, about an appeal in the works. The headlines screamed across every major outlet. Action star arrested for assault, headed to prison. Social media exploded within hours. Fans defended him passionately. Critics celebrated his downfall. Memes flooded timelines. Late-night talk shows made jokes. Everyone had an opinion, but none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that every detail had been choreographed by the FBI. On the morning of his transfer, Steven was stripped of his belongings in a processing center that smelled like sweat and disinfectant. His watch, his wallet, his belt, all placed in a plastic bag and sealed. His clothes were replaced with an orange jumpsuit, stiff and uncomfortable. His wrists were cuffed. His ankles were shackled. He was loaded into a transport van with 5 other inmates, all heading to different facilities. None of them spoke. The only sound was the rattle of chains and the hum of the engine. Through the small window, Steven watched the city disappear. The buildings grew smaller. The streets turned to highways, then to empty roads cutting through barren hills, and then, rising in the distance like a fortress, he saw it. Redwood State Penitentiary, concrete walls 30 feet high, guard towers every 50 yards, razor wire coiled along the top like steel serpents. The gate was solid iron, ancient and unyielding. When it opened, the sound echoed like a tomb ceiling shut. The van rolled inside. The gate closed behind them. Steven felt the weight of it, the isolation, the finality. He was inside now, and there was no turning back. Inside, the guards treated him like any other inmate, rough, indifferent, suspicious. They didn't care about his movies, his fame, his past. Here, he was just another number. He was assigned to Block C, the worst block in Redwood, Kovac's block. As Steven walked down the corridor for the first time, inmates pressed against the bars of their cells, faces twisted with curiosity, amusement, hostility. Yo.
It's the movie guy.
Think you're tough now, Seagal? Let's see you fight without a stunt double, pretty boy. Laughter echoed off the walls. Fists banged against metal. The noise was deafening. Steven kept his eyes forward, his face blank, his stride steady. He'd been in dangerous places before, war zones, cartels, underground fights. But this was different. Here, reputation meant nothing. Here, survival was earned in blood. And somewhere in this concrete hell, Victor Kovac was watching, waiting. The first punch came during lunch on day 2. The cafeteria was a war zone disguised as a dining hall. Long metal tables bolted to the floor, plastic trays, dull utensils counted and recounted. The air thick with the smell of overcooked food, sweat, and tension that never quite disappeared. Guards stood along the walls, hands resting on Baton's eyes, scanning constantly, but never intervening unless blood was spilled. Steven sat alone at a table in the corner, eating in silence, observing everything. He watched the social hierarchy play out in real time. Certain tables belonged to certain gangs. The Aryans in the north corner, the Bloods near the serving line, the Latinos by the windows. Everyone knew their place. Everyone followed the invisible rules. And at the center of it all, like a king holding court, sat Victor Kovac. Then a shadow fell over Steven's tray. He looked up slowly. Victor Kovac, 6'5", maybe 260 pounds of muscle and malice. Arms like steel beams, veins visible beneath tattooed skin. His presence alone made the temperature drop. Conversations around them died. Inmates watched, waiting, knowing what was coming. You know who I am. Kovac's voice was deep, a rumble from somewhere dark and primal. Steven met his eyes, calm, measured. I've heard. Kovac's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Good. Then you know how this works. You pay tribute, every week. Cigarettes, commissary, whatever I want. That's the tax for breathing my air. Steven set down his fork slowly, deliberately. I'm not interested. The cafeteria went silent. Not quiet silent. Like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Inmates at nearby tables stopped eating. Guards shifted their weight, hands moving closer to their radios. Even the kitchen staff paused, watching through the serving window. Kovac tilted his head, genuinely amused now. Like a cat that just found an interesting mouse. You think because you played tough guys in movies, you're actually tough. Steven's expression didn't change. I think you're wasting your time. For a moment, Kovac just stared at him. Then his smile vanished completely, replaced by something cold and deadly. He grabbed Steven by the collar with one massive hand and yanked him to his feet like he weighed nothing. Let me make this simple, movie star. In here I'm God, and God doesn't like disrespect. Before Steven could respond, Kovac's knee slammed into his ribs with devastating force. The air exploded from Steven's lungs. Pain radiated through his torso, white-hot and blinding. He doubled over, gasping, and Kovac released him. Steven hit the ground hard, the concrete cold and unforgiving against his cheek. The inmates erupted, shouting, laughing, banging on tables. Some stood on benches to get a better view. Others chanted Kovac's name like he was a champion in the arena. Kovac stood over him, boots inches from Steven's face, and kicked him hard in the side. Once, the impact drove the breath from him again. Twice, ribs screamed in protest. 3 times, Steven tasted blood, felt his body trying to curl into itself. Every instinct screaming to fight back, to defend, to survive. But he couldn't, not yet. Guards watched from the walls, hands on their weapons but making no move to intervene. This was Kovac's show. Everyone knew it. Even the system bent to his will. Steven stayed down, breathing through the pain, forcing his mind to stay sharp, focused, stay in character. Don't blow cover. Let him think he's won. Kovac crouched beside him, his breath hot and rancid, voice low and venomous enough that only Steven could hear. Welcome to my kingdom. You survive here by my rules. You eat when I say, you sleep when I say, you live because I allow it. Understand? Steven nodded weakly, blood dripping from his split lip onto the concrete. Kovac stood laughing, a deep booming sound that filled the cafeteria. He raised his arms like a victor, and the crowd responded with roars of approval. Then he walked away, his lieutenants falling in step behind him, the crowd parting like the sea. The show was over. Lunch resumed. Guards radioed that the situation was contained. The noise returned to normal levels, but one man stayed behind, an older inmate with gray hair, lines carved deep into his weathered face, tired eyes that had seen too much. He moved quietly, carefully helping Steven to his feet without drawing attention. His name was Lewis. He was serving year 19 of a 25-year sentence for a crime he'd stopped talking about a decade ago. He said nothing as he supported Steven's weight, guiding him slowly toward the exit, past the guards, down the corridor toward the cell blocks. Why'd you help me? Steven asked quietly, each word painful. Lewis glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear, then whispered, because I know who you really are. Steven's blood froze, his entire body tense despite the pain. Lewis kept walking, kept his voice low. I worked in the warden's office for 3 years. Filed paperwork. Processed transfers. I saw your file, the real one, not the fake arrest record. Steven's mind raced, calculating, trying to determine if this was a trap. You're not just a celebrity doing time. Lewis continued. You're a Fed. If you tell anyone, I'm not going to. Lewis's voice was firm, final. But you need to be smarter. Kovac's got eyes everywhere. Guards, inmates, kitchen staff, even the damn janitors. If he finds out you're a plant, you won't leave this place alive. They reached Steven's cell. Lewis helped him inside, then stood at the doorway, then helped me get close to him. Steven said. Lewis shook his head slowly, sadly. You don't get close to Kovac. You survive him. That's it. That's the only play. But Steven wasn't there to survive. He was there to end this. That night, Steven lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. The kick, the laughter, the pain still radiating through his ribs with every breath. The complete control Kovac had over everyone, inmates, guards, the entire system. It was suffocating, absolute, terrifying in its efficiency. But Steven also noticed something. Kovac had a rhythm, a pattern, a routine. He moved through the prison like clockwork. Cafeteria at noon, always the same table. Yard time at 3 p.m., surrounded by his crew. Back to his cell by 9 p.m. for lockdown. But every Tuesday and Thursday night something different happened. Kovac disappeared. Steven had seen it during his first night, too disoriented then to understand what it meant. Around 10 p.m., after lights out, Kovac's cell door would open, electronically, from the guard station. He'd slip out with 2 of his men, moving through corridors that should have been locked down, heading toward the maintenance wing. Guards didn't stop him. Cameras didn't record him. It was like he was invisible. That's where the deals were happening. That's where the operation ran. Steven just had to find proof. 2 days later, Steven made his move. During rec time in the yard, concrete walls rising around them like a cage open to the sky, inmates clustered in their groups. Some lifted weights. Others played cards. A few just stood in the sun, soaking up the only natural light they'd see all day. Steven approached one of Kovac's lieutenants, a wary man named Ricky with a scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight in another prison. His eyes were sharp, constantly moving, assessing threats. I want in, Steven said simply. Ricky stopped mid-conversation with another inmate, turned slowly, looked Steven up and down like he was examining a piece of meat. Then he laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound. And you got your ass kicked 2 days ago, movie star. You were on the ground, bleeding, begging, and I learned my lesson. Steven kept his voice steady, his eyes hard. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm not here to fight the system. I'm here to survive. And if Kovac runs things, then I want to work for him. Ricky's smile faded. He stepped closer, invading Steven's space, trying to intimidate him. Why should we trust you? You show up out of nowhere, all over the news, and suddenly you want to join the family. Sounds like a setup to me, Steven didn't back down, didn't blink, because I've got connections on the outside. Money, resources, people who owe me favors. And I'm tired of being treated like trash by a system that doesn't give a damn about me. He let bitterness creep into his voice. Let the anger show, the kind of anger a broken man would feel. I did everything right out there. Worked hard, played by the rules, and where did it get me? Here, in this hellhole. So yeah, I want in. I want protection, I want respect. And I'm willing to pay for both. Ricky studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowed, searching for deception, for weakness, for anything that didn't fit. Then he nodded slowly. I'll talk to him. But if you're lying, if this is some kind of game, you're done. Not just done in here, done everywhere. We've got reach beyond these walls. You understand? Steven nodded. I understand. Ricky turned and walked away back to his crew. They whispered among themselves, glancing occasionally at Steven. He could feel their eyes on him, feel the weight of the decision being made. He went back to his corner of the yard, sat on a bench, and waited. Inside, his heart was pounding like a war drum. He was in, or he was about to be dead. 3 nights later, just after 10 p.m., Steven's cell door opened with an electronic buzz. A guard stood outside, face impassive, hand resting casually on his baton. Let's go. Someone wants to see you. Steven stood slowly, his ribs still aching, and followed the guard through the darkened corridors. The prison was different at night, quieter, heavier, shadows stretching long and menacing. Most inmates were locked down, asleep or pretending to be. They walked past the common areas, past the administrative wing, toward the maintenance section. The halls were dimmer here. Pipes dripped steadily, the sound echoing off concrete walls. The air smelled like rust, old sweat, and something chemical Steven couldn't identify. The guard stopped at a storage room, knocked twice on the metal door. It opened from the inside. Ricky stood there, expressionless, inside. Now, Steven stepped through. The room was lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, swaying slightly, casting moving shadows. Old equipment lined the walls, tools, mops, industrial cleaners. In the center stood a metal table, and behind it stood Victor Kovac. 2 guards flanked him, both clearly on his payroll, both armed, both watching Steven with dead eyes. Kovac leaned against the table, arms crossed, sizing Steven up like a predator deciding whether prey was worth the effort. So, Kovac said, his voice filling the small space. The movie star wants to join the family. Steven met his eyes, kept his breathing steady, played the part. I want to be useful. I want to be protected. And I'm willing to pay for both. Kovac circled him slowly, boots heavy on the concrete floor, studying him from every angle. What can you offer me that I don't already have? Access. Steven turned to keep Kovac in view. My lawyer visits me twice a week. High-profile case means high-profile representation. No bag searches, no pat-downs, minimal supervision. I can move things in and out that you can't. Kovac stopped circling. His eyes gleamed with interest, dangerous and calculating. Phones. Steven nodded. Phones, documents, money, messages. Whatever you need. For the first time, Kovac smiled, a genuine smile that somehow made him look even more terrifying. All right, movie star. You get one chance. One. Prove yourself, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to be useful. He gestured to a black duffel bag sitting in the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of crates. There's a package in there. You're going to hide it in the library tomorrow during free time. Shelf 12, behind the law books. Someone will pick it up. You don't ask questions, you don't look inside. You just do what you're told. Steven walked to the bag, picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, something solid shifting inside. Understand? Kovac's voice was steel. I understand. Good. Because this is your audition. Mess it up, and they'll find you in pieces. Back in his cell an hour later, Steven carefully opened the duffel bag. Inside he 3 burner phones, wrapped tightly in plastic, and a handwritten note with names, dates, and locations. He memorized everything, every name, every number, every detail. Then, moving silently, he removed the signal device hidden in the sole of his shoe, a tiny piece of tech the FBI had smuggled in during processing. He activated it, sent a brief encrypted message to Agent Chen, Kovac coordinating outside hits. Proof in hand, need extraction plan. Her reply came an hour later, the device vibrating once against his palms. Stand by. Do not engage until we're ready. Steven deleted the messages, deactivated the device, hit it again. Then he lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, knowing he was running out of time. Kovac was testing him, and the real test was just beginning. The next day, Steven planted the package exactly as instructed. The library was quiet, almost peaceful, a strange contrast to the violence that pulsed through the rest of Redwood. Rows of old books lined metal shelves, their spines cracked and faded. A few inmates sat at tables writing letters, pretending that knowledge could somehow set them free. Steven moved casually to shelf 12, slipped the duffel bag behind a row of dusty law books that probably hadn't been touched in years. But he also did something else. Hidden in his palm was a micro-tracker, no bigger than a pill, provided by the FBI before he'd entered. He pressed it carefully into the seam of one of the phones inside the bag, his movements shielded by his body. If the FBI could trace the pickup, track where the phones went, they'd have the whole network, names, locations, the entire operation. He walked away, returned to his cell, and waited. That afternoon in the yard, Kovac approached him again. This time he wasn't alone. 6 men surrounded him, his most trusted lieutenants. Ricky was there, along with others Steven had started to recognize. Tank, a massive Samoan with tattoos covering every inch of visible skin. Dmitri, a quiet Russian who never smiled. Carlos, wary and dangerous, always carrying a shank somewhere. The yard went quiet as they moved. Inmates scattered, giving them space, knowing better than to be close when Kovac was conducting business. "Walk with me, Seagal." It wasn't a request. They moved to the far corner of the yard, away from the guard towers, away from anyone who might hear. The concrete wall rose behind them, razor wire glinting in the afternoon sun. Kovac's tone shifted, colder, sharper, more businesslike. "You did good yesterday?" "Real good. Package was picked up clean. No problems, no heat." Steven nodded, keeping his face neutral. "So now I'm going to trust you with something bigger." Kovac reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges like it had been handled many times. He handed it to Steven. Steven unfolded it carefully. A name, an address, a photo printed from what looked like a security camera. The man in the photo was in his 40s, glasses, thinning hair, the face of someone who worked behind a desk, someone ordinary. "There's a man on the outside," Kovac said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "A witness. Accountant for my old crew. Got cold feet. Cut a deal with the feds. He's supposed to testify against me in 2 weeks. Grand jury. They've got him in protective custody, but we know where he is." Steven's stomach dropped, he cold weight settling there. He knew what was coming next. "I need him gone." Steven looked up from the paper, met Kovac's eyes. "You want me to?" Kovac cut him off. "I want you to make a call. Use your lawyer's next visit. He'll set up a secure line. You make contact with my people on the outside, give them the green light, they'll handle the rest. You're just the messenger." Steven's jaw tightened. Every muscle in his body wanted to refuse, to fight, to end this right now. But he couldn't. Not yet. This was it. The moment that could blow his cover completely, or lock Kovac away forever with evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. "I'll do it," Steven said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Kovac's smile returned, predatory and satisfied. "Good. Because if you don't, I'll know. And so will everyone in here. And when they find what's left of you, there won't be enough pieces to identify." He stepped closer, his breath hot against Steven's face. 2 days. That's your deadline. My lawyer will contact yours. You make the call. You prove you're loyal. Or you die. Simple. Kovac walked away, his men following like a pack, leaving Steven standing alone against the wall. He stood there, the paper burning in his hand, his mind racing through possibilities, scenarios, ways this could go wrong. He had just been ordered to arrange a murder, and he had 48 hours to stop it, without getting himself killed. That night, Steven contacted Agent Chen again using the hidden signal device. His message was urgent, coded but clear. "They want me to arrange hit on witness. Federal protective custody. Need name, need intercept, 48 hours. The wait for her response felt like drowning. 30 minutes passed. An hour. Guards made their rounds. The prison settled into its nighttime rhythm of distant shouts, clanging metal, footsteps echoing in empty corridors. Finally, the device vibrated. "We know the target. Samuel Brennan. We'll handle it. Stage accident. Make it look real. You follow through on your end. Sell it. This is our chance." Steven read it twice, then deleted it. 12 hours later, the plan was in motion. The FBI worked fast. They staged a car accident on a rural highway outside Sacramento. Brennan's protective custody vehicle, or what appeared to be his vehicle, was found wrapped around a tree, flames still smoldering. Local news picked it up within hours. By evening, it was on every major network. Federal witness dies in suspicious accident. The anchors speculated. Was it brake failure? Was it foul play? Investigations were ongoing. Inside Redwood, inmates watched on the common room TV during dinner. Steven watched too. Standing near the back, his expression carefully neutral. Kovac sat at his usual table, surrounded by his crew. When the news segment aired, he glanced up at the screen. Then he looked across the room. His eyes found Steven's, and he smiled, a slow, satisfied smile. He nodded once, a gesture of approval, of acceptance. Steven nodded back, his hand steady despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. But inside, he knew the truth. Kovac was going to want proof, real proof, phone records, confirmation from his people on the outside, details that matched, and if the FBI's cover story had even one crack, even one detail that didn't line up perfectly, Steven was dead. The fight was brutal. 4 men came through the tunnel, armed with shanks fashioned from sharpened metal, chains pulled from workshop equipment, and pure rage born from years behind bars. The tunnel was narrow, claustrophobic, lit only by the dim red emergency lights that barely penetrated the darkness. Water dripped from overhead pipes. The walls were slick with condensation. Every sound echoed, amplified, disorienting. Steven moved like he hadn't moved in years. Not like a movie star performing choreographed sequences for cameras. Like a man fighting for his life. The first attacker came hard and fast. Tank, the massive Samoan, his bulk filling the tunnel, chain wrapped around his fist like a medieval weapon. He swung. Steven ducked, felt the chain whistle past his ear, heard it slam into the concrete wall with a crack that sent sparks flying. He came up inside Tank's guard, drove his elbow into the man's throat, a precise strike to the trachea that cut off air instantly. Tank stumbled back, gasping, choking. Steven grabbed his arm, used his own momentum against him, twisted and threw him into the wall with a technique that was pure martial arts, no Hollywood flash. Tank's head hit concrete with a sickening thud. He dropped like a felled tree. Lewis took down the second man, Dmitri, the quiet Russian who'd never seemed dangerous until now. Lewis moved with the precision of someone who'd been trained by federal agencies, someone who'd survived in worlds far more dangerous than prison yards. He swung the pipe. One clean hit to Dmitri's knee that shattered the joint with an audible crack. Dmitri screamed, went down. Lewis followed with another strike to the ribs, controlled, efficient, devastating. Dmitri stopped moving, but the third man got behind Steven while he was still recovering from throwing Tank. Carlos, wary, fast, vicious. He wrapped a chain around Steven's neck from behind, pulled tight with the strength of desperation, and orders from Kovac that meant life or death. The chain bit into Steven's throat, cutting off air, cutting off blood flow to his brain. Steven's vision blurred immediately, red spots dancing at the edges, the world starting to tunnel. His hands clawed at the chain, but Carlos had leverage, had position, had the advantage. Steven's lungs screamed for oxygen that wouldn't come. He had seconds before he lost consciousness, maybe 10 seconds before permanent damage. He stopped fighting the chain. Instead, he drove his elbow backward, once, twice, 3 times, aiming for the floating ribs, the vulnerable spots he'd trained to hit thousands of times. He felt something crack. Felt Carlos's grip weaken just slightly. It was enough. Steven dropped his weight suddenly, bent forward, used Carlos's own grip as a fulcrum, and threw him over his shoulder in a brutal judo technique. Carlos hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The chain loosened. Steven ripped it away, gasped for air, his throat burning, his vision still spotty. Carlos tried to get up, still dangerous, still fighting. Steven grabbed his head with both hands and dropped him, with a throw that left the man unconscious on the wet concrete. The fourth man, Ricky, the lieutenant with the scarred face, took one look at his 3 companions on the ground and ran. His footsteps echoed down the tunnel, fading into darkness. Lewis and Steven stood there in the dim red light, breathing hard, blood on their knuckles, sweat and condensation dripping from their faces. Lewis leaned against the wall, clutching his ribs, his face pale. "You okay?" Steven asked, his voice hoarse from the chain. "I'll live." "You?" Steven nodded, though his throat felt like it had been scraped with sandpaper. Then a sound cut through the chaos, clear, authoritative, amplified through the entire prison's PA system. Agent Marissa Chen's voice. "This is the FBI. The facility is now under federal control. Victor Kovac, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. All inmates return to your cells immediately. Failure to comply will result in additional charges." The raid was happening. Steven and Luis looked at each other, relief flooding through them. Dozens of federal agents flooded into Redwood, tactical gear, automatic weapons, search warrants, arrest warrants, the full force of a month's long investigation finally coming to fruition. They moved with military precision through every block, every corridor, every hidden corner of the prison. Kovac was dragged out of his cell in handcuffs, screaming threats, swearing revenge, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You're dead."
"Seagal, you hear me? Dead? I own people on the outside."
"I own." An agent shoved him forward, cutting off his rant. "Save it for your lawyer. You're going to need a good one." Guards who'd been on Kovac's payroll were arrested alongside him, 12 in total, including the 2 who'd been in the storage room during Steven's first meeting. Evidence was seized. Phones, documents, ledgers hidden in air vents and wall panels. The entire operation dismantled piece by piece. Steven was escorted out of the tunnel by Agent Chen herself. She looked him over, the bruises forming on his neck, the blood on his knuckles, the exhaustion in his eyes. "You did it," she said quietly, genuine respect in her voice. Steven shook his head. "Louis did it. He saved my life." "Get him out. He deserves witness protection. He deserves his freedom. He deserves everything you promised me and didn't give him 20 years ago." Chen's expression softened. She nodded. "Already in motion. He'll be processed out within 72 hours. New identity, clean record, everything." Steven felt something loosen in his chest, relief, vindication, justice. As he walked through the corridors of Redwood for the last time, past cells still filled with inmates watching through bars, past the cafeteria where Kovac had kicked him, past the yard where he'd been humiliated, he saw Louis being escorted by 2 agents. Their eyes met across the distance. No words were exchanged. Louis just nodded, a single gesture that carried 20 years of pain, of survival, of finally being seen. Steven nodded back, and then they both walked toward freedom. Outside, the night air was cold and clean, free from the smell of concrete and sweat and fear. Black SUVs lined the prison entrance. News helicopters circled overhead, spotlights cutting through the darkness. Reporters were already setting up, ready to broadcast the biggest prison raid in California history. Chen handed Steven a phone. "Call anyone you want. You're officially done." Steven took the phone but didn't dial immediately. He just stood there, breathing free air, looking up at stars he'd almost forgotten existed. Somewhere behind him, the gates of Redwood closed with that same echoing finality. But this time, he was on the right side of them. 3 months later, in a small cafe in Oregon, far from cameras and headlines and the wreckage of his undercover life, Steven sat across from Louis. Louis looked different, clean-shaven, new clothes, hair cut short, eyes that still carried weight but also something new, hope. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Louis ordered coffee. Steven ordered the same. They sat in comfortable silence. 2 men who'd walked through hell and somehow made it out the other side. Finally, Louis spoke.
"What now?"
Steven thought about it. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's real. No more pretending. No more playing roles." Louis smiled, a genuine smile. "Maybe the first in 20 years. Sounds good to me." They finished their coffee, shook hands outside the cafe, and walked in opposite directions. Both of them free. Both of them alive. Both of them carrying the weight of what they'd survived, but no longer crushed by it. And that, Steven thought as he walked down the quiet street, was enough. 3 months later, in a small cafe in Oregon, far from cameras and headlines and the wreckage of his undercover life, Steven sat across from Louis. Louis looked different, clean-shaven, new clothes, hair cut short, eyes that still carried weight but also something new, hope. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Louis ordered coffee. Steven ordered the same. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd walked through hell and somehow made it out the other side. Finally, Louis spoke. "What now?" Steven thought about it. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's real. No more pretending. No more playing roles." Louis smiled, a genuine smile, maybe the first in 20 years. "Sounds good to me." They finished their coffee, shook hands outside the cafe, and walked in opposite directions. Both of them free. Both of them alive. Both of them carrying the weight of what they'd survived, but no longer crushed by it. And that, Steven thought as he walked down the quiet street, was enough. 3 months later, in a small cafe in Oregon, far from cameras and headlines and the wreckage of his undercover life, Steven sat across from Louis. Louis looked different, clean-shaven, new clothes, hair cut short, eyes that still carried weight but also something new, hope. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Louis ordered coffee. Steven ordered the same. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd walked through hell and somehow made it out the other side. Finally, Louis spoke. What now? Steven thought about it. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's real. No more pretending. No more playing roles. Louis smiled, a genuine smile. Maybe the first in 20 years. Sounds good to me. They finished their coffee, shook hands outside the cafe, and walked in opposite directions. Both of them free. Both of them alive. Both of them carrying the weight of what they'd survived, but no longer crushed by it. And that, Steven thought as he walked down the quiet street, was enough. 3 months after that coffee meeting, Louis walked out of a federal processing center in Seattle a completely free man. Not just released, free, charges dropped, record expunged. A second chance at a life that had been stolen from him 2 decades ago. The morning was gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather. But to Louis it felt like the most beautiful day of his life. He stood on the sidewalk in new clothes that actually fit, breathing air that tasted different somehow, lighter, cleaner, full of possibility instead of despair. A car pulled up to the curb. Black sedan windows tinted. The door opened. Steven Seagal stepped out. He wasn't supposed to be there. The FBI had advised against contact, said it was better for both of them to move on separately, start fresh without reminders of what they'd endured. But Steven had never been good at following rules when they didn't make sense. Louis saw him and stopped, emotions flickering across his face. Surprise, gratitude, something deeper that didn't have words. They met on the sidewalk. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 2 men who'd faced death together, who'd fought back in a tunnel that smelled like rust and fear, who'd been abandoned by systems that should have protected them but chose bureaucracy over humanity. Then they shook hands, firm, solid. Real. You didn't have to come, Louis said, his voice rough with emotion.
Yeah, I did.
Steven replied simply. Why? Steven thought about it, choosing his words carefully. Because nobody should walk out of hell alone. And because you deserved someone to be here who actually gives a damn. Louis nodded, his throat tight, unable to speak. Steven handed him an envelope. What's this? New start. Account information. Enough to get you through the first year while you figure things out. Job contacts. A place to stay if you need it. No strings. No debt. Just help. Louis opened the envelope, saw the numbers on the bank statement, and his eyes widened. I can't. You can. And you will. Because you earned it. 20 years of your life stolen because the system failed you. This doesn't make it right. Nothing makes it right. But it's a start. Louis looked at the envelope, then at Steven, then back at the envelope. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. A real, genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face, erasing years of pain and replacing it with something that looked almost like joy. Thank you, he said simply. Steven nodded. What are you going to do now? He asked. Louis looked up at the gray sky, at the city stretching out before him, full of people living lives he'd only watched from behind bars. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it'll be mine. My choice. My life. Sounds perfect. They stood there a moment longer, then embraced, not a handshake this time, but a real embrace between brothers forged in fire. When they separated, Louis had tears in his eyes. If you ever need anything, Steven cut him off gently. I know where to find you. And you know where to find me. That's enough. Louis nodded, turned and walked toward his new life. Steven watched him go until he disappeared around a corner. Then he got back in the car and drove away, knowing he'd done the right thing. Knowing that sometimes justice isn't about the system. Sometimes it's about one person refusing to let another person be forgotten. The lesson: power isn't about how loud you are or how much fear you can instill in others. It's about how strong you stay when no one's watching, when the cameras are off, when there's no applause or recognition. Respect isn't something you demand from people beneath you or give only to those who can benefit you. It's something you show to everyone, especially when they can't do anything for you in return, especially when you think no one will notice or care. Steven went into that prison as a movie star, someone famous, someone people thought they knew. He came out as something more, something deeper. A man who understood that real strength isn't measured in how many fights you win. It's measured in who you help when they're losing theirs. A man who learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up for what's right even when you're the one on the ground, bleeding, with every reason to give up. Louis spent 20 years invisible, forgotten, abandoned by a system that used him and discarded him. He came out visible again, not as a victim, but as a survivor with a future. And somewhere in a tunnel beneath Redwood State Penitentiary, Their story became legend. Inmates who'd witnessed what happened passed it down to new arrivals. The story of the movie star who wasn't what he seemed. The story of the old man who'd been undercover for 2 decades and nobody knew. The story of how they fought side by side against impossible odds and won, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to let each other fall. True power is silent, true respect is earned, and true courage is standing beside someone when the whole world has walked away. Type rage.He in the comments if this story moved you, if you believe that humility and loyalty are real strength, if you've ever felt forgotten and wished someone had noticed. And tell me, which part kept you hooked the most? Was it the fight in the tunnel when everything seemed lost? Was it the moment Lewis revealed he'd been undercover for 20 years? Was it Kovac getting dragged away in handcuffs, his kingdom crumbling? Or was it the ending, when Steven showed up for Louis when nobody else would? Drop a comment and let me know. Your feedback doesn't just help us, it shapes the stories we tell next, the characters we create, the moments we choose to highlight. Because these stories aren't just about entertainment. They're about reminding us what matters. About showing us that even in the darkest places, humanity survives. That even when systems fail, people don't have to. That even when you're alone, you might not be as alone as you think. More incredible journeys are coming your way. Stories of courage, of redemption, of people who refused to quit when quitting was the only logical choice. Stories that remind you why you should never underestimate the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the ones the world has written off. Because sometimes, those are the ones who change everything. Stay humble, stay strong, stay human, and I'll see you in the next one.